it's pretty embarrassing for this public safety minister. I mean, Bill C-2 is actually the first piece of legislation that this government introduced. They got it so wrong, so badly right off the bat, that the ministers basically had to use a mulligan and a do-over.
There's been a lot of talk online about Pierre and the Conservatives allegedly not speaking out against Bills C2, C8, and C9. And this has been very confusing to us. Either those people aren't following Canadian politics at all and are uninformed, or they do, and they are deliberately trying to misinform you. Case in point is Bill C2. This is the bill that would have granted the government sweeping powers to open your mail and demand that your internet service provider surrender your data, all without a warrant. And it is exactly because of how much the Conservatives have been speaking out and opposing and pushing back against Bill C2 that it has been completely gutted and is now a shell of its former self. Let's take a look.
More fundamentally, they're obstructing, they're stepping on their own agenda by weaving into this bill provisions that make a lot of Canadians wonder, well, why is that there? There's some additional concerns that this bill raises around civil liberties. They've woven in provisions that involve, for instance, an ability to open mail without oversight. The ability to compel internet companies to hand over private information, additional provisions around warrantless searches. This government does not have a great track record when it comes to protecting Canadians' data. It doesn't have a great track record when it comes to understanding and respecting the privacy, the rights, or the civil liberties of Canadians. And yet a government that has done so badly in these areas is asking for more powers in the area of opening mail without oversight, compelling the transfer of private information, and also warrantless searches. So these and the issues around cash that I raised address other concerns about what this government is really driving at with this bill. What we really need to see, is fundamental reforms to our criminal justice system that get us back to a time in which crime was going down. Crime was going down before this government took office. It's gone up since they took office. So we need to ask why that's happened, and we need a reversal of approach.
The Honourable Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very confused as to what the member opposite was trying to convey, because it sounds like, in theory, for the last 4 years I've been here, he's been talking about having a bill like this one. So what exactly is he suggesting that we can work on committee on to move this forward collaboratively? Because Canadian voters want to see us have a bill for borders, and as well as work in cooperation with the whole House to make sure that we can pass good and sensible bills. So what exactly is the member trying to shift and change in this bill? Because he spent 4 years talking about this. So now we have a bill, and he is complaining. What is he complaining about?
Constable for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to repeat what I just said. We have concerns about the provisions in the bill around use of cash and limiting that. We have concerns about the restrictions on civil liberties. We have actually been asking for changes to sentencing, to parole, to bail. Those changes are not in this bill. So the changes that we have said are critically needed when it comes to criminal justice are not in this bill. And they've instead put forward a bill that has some supportable provisions, but that weaves in some areas, some concepts that are clearly of concern. And I'm sorry if it was necessary to repeat that, but hopefully it's clear to the member now that those provisions we're talking about, use of cash, provisions being an issue, as well as restrictions on civil liberties. Thank you.
So this is just one of the many, many parts C2 during that debate where the Conservatives got up and they talked about this. And if you go back and actually look at our video of when C2 initially dropped, these are precisely the concerns that we had when we analyzed the bill. Very, very disturbing issues when it comes to this bill. And the Liberal stands up and says, you've been asking for a bill on borders for 4 years and we finally, put one forward. What's the problem? Well, here's the problem, is that what the Liberal government loves to do is they love to put in some pieces of legislation into a bill that makes sense. You can kind of get behind that, granting CBSA the ability to actually operate at ports and places like that, where people and goods are coming in, and grant them the authority to actually walk in there and operate like they should. But then they weave in these very, very disturbing pieces of legislation that would chip away at our charter rights. And I guess they're just hoping that nobody would notice. This is one of the key roles of the opposition, is to make sure they fully understand every single piece of legislation that comes through and oppose it whenever it's necessary. So C2 was in the midst of second reading, and this is where people are allowed to stand up, make their arguments, and people are allowed to ask questions and make counter arguments and all of this. So this is what was going on in C2 for a while. And this is just Garnet Genis. Let's get to the next person.
Drug dealers are using Canada Post because it's cheap and easy. Allowing warrantless searches might stop the dealers from using the mail, but it won't stop the dealing and the distribution of drugs. What it will do is stop regular Canadians from trusting the mail. And given the decline in trust and confidence we've seen across the democratic countries, this bill does too little to help and does too much to hurt. Canadians want to have confidence in their government, and they want to know that it's tackling security. They want criminals in jail and our border under control. But we can't have trust in a government that gives itself the power to spy on its citizens without a warrant based on reasonable grounds. It's these checks and balances on state power that instill trust. It is still the competent execution of those powers that builds confidence. Conservatives call on this government to remove these sections that where the trust is undermined.
So this is the tail end of Cheryl Gallant's speech, and I encourage everybody to, if you have 8 hours, because that's how long this debate went on that day, I encourage you to look at it. The links are always in the description, as you know. It's a slog to get through, but it is interesting when you watch these debates to see what arguments are made and what questions are asked and what counter arguments are then put forward by the Liberals. And she lays it out. This is a very, very big concern when a government wants to give itself the ability to essentially spy on its citizens and see what they're doing over the internet. And it's all in the name of, well, you can't protect yourselves. We'll protect you. You just have to surrender your rights to allow us to do that. But don't worry, trust us. It's not like we have a track record of infringing on the rights of Canadians in the past, right? And that's her whole point. Now, I mentioned questions. Mr. Mark Gerritsen stood up to ask a question. Here it is.
Word on the street right now, the rumor that's been flying around, is that the newly elected member from Battle River Crowfoot plans to run in her riding of Algonquin, Renfrew, Pembroke in the next general election. And that he might even be trying to push her out in order to do that. So my question to the member is, can she assure us that she will be the member in the candidate?
Can I remind the honourable members that such questions are not really government business? The honourable member for Algonquin, Renfrew, Pembroke.
Madam Speaker, I was wondering who started that rumor. But let's get back to the bill. C-2 is a Trojan horse. It promises security but delivers surveillance. It promises order but delivers control. And it's not the kind of legislation that Canadians expect from a government that claims to respect the Charter. Let's work together to craft legislation that truly strengthens our borders without weakening our freedoms.
Now, it's funny. In the interview that we had with Pierre, we talked very briefly about the fact that there's been no dissension within the Conservative caucus. Everyone has been united, and that is attributed to a strong leader that has the trust of his team. And what Pierre had come back and said was, there's no lack of trying. Like they're trying to create controversy, but there's nothing there. Case in point, Mark Garretson trying to say, oh, well, Pierre's going to try and push you out. What do you think about that? Never mind the fact that you raised very serious concerns with a piece of legislation that my party has put forward, and I'm not going to address those. I'm just going to start a rumor. Ladies and gentlemen, liberal politics in action. That's what you see there. And I love how she handled it. She's like, oh, I was wondering who started that rumor. Bang, swats it away, and then dives right back into the core issue, which is the provisions that were put into this bill that would erode the charter rights of Canadians. Now, this is not a left versus right issue on this bill. It's not. And the reason I can say that is because even Elizabeth May, who leans very, very hard left, had significant concerns with this bill. And she called out the Liberals on it in debate.
I've looked through the government's tabling through the Minister of Justice, the charter statement to say, is this bill charter compliant? And it really comes down to a series of statements of an analysis that, yes, this could attract challenges under Section 8 of the Charter. Yes, this does involve intrusions in privacy, but it's all going to be okay because trust us. At this point, we're looking at intrusions in our civil liberties, which other members of Parliament have mentioned, with a very low threshold to be able to open our mail. Yes, it's true, as the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary said, that a small envelope with a small amount of fentanyl can kill many people. But this doesn't try to categorize in any way or create any kind of threshold for reasonable suspicion that this is conveying drugs. This is a very different way of approaching protection of Canadians, because what it's really about when you look at it in the current political context is what can we do to convince Donald Trump that we're going to sacrifice the civil liberties of Canadians to meet the talking points of a deranged U.S. president. It's just not acceptable. I urge all members of Parliament in this place, all parties, to take the time it takes. Yes, this bill will get second reading. I think it's unlikely we can stop it. That would be great. The Liberals do not have a majority in this place. Maybe we can stop it from going to second reading. There's no point passing a law that will be very soon struck down by the courts as violating our charter rights.
So if you kind of ignore the irrelevant parts of what she was talking about and strip away all of that, you actually have a cogent argument there. This is stripping away the civil liberties of Canadians. This bill has, even if it was passed, all that is going to happen is it's going to be tied up in court over and over and over again because of the fact that it infringes on our charter rights. So even Elizabeth May has said, this is no good. No good at all. And turns out her hopes were actually fulfilled. The bill didn't finish debate and get to second reading. What happened? Gary Nandasangari guts Strong Borders Bill, removes clauses giving law enforcement warrantless powers. This is from the Globe and Mail. Public Safety Minister Gary Nandasangari gutted the government's Strong Borders Bill and introduced a watered-down version Wednesday, removing controversial clauses that were sharply criticized for threatening personal privacy and potentially breaching the Charter rights and freedoms. Bill C-2 would have enabled police and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service to demand to know if people had used services such as a telecom provider, hotel, or doctor without needing a warrant. But the new slimmed-down variant known as Bill C12 would not grant law enforcement these powers. Speaking to reporters in Parliament, the Public Safety Minister said that after consulting MPs, senators, and expert groups, the government felt that, quote, putting forward a second bill that carves out the more contentious elements of Bill C-2 will enable us to get swifter passages, end quote. Quote, I am comfortable in saying that this should get broader support, end quote, he said. Introducing a new version of a bill partway through its passage through Parliament is unusual, but the original bill was attracting a slew of criticism from civil liberties and open internet groups, and steep opposition from the Conservatives and the NDP. The Justice Department warned that it would clash with charter rights. Had to throw it in the trash. Wasn't even finished, C2. They didn't even get to vote on it. That's how much opposition was being thrown against this. That's how much opposition the Conservatives threw at this. That's how much they were speaking against this. So for those saying, well, you know, Pierre and the Conservatives, they're not standing up. Yes, they absolutely are. Why don't you pay attention to politics? Maybe you'll actually see that they are. They are standing up and they are speaking against these things, to the point that they managed to kill C2 before it was even voted on. Now, what we expected to happen is that C2 would have been voted on, and then it would have gone directly to committee, and then you would have had this long drawn-out study, and all these civil liberties associations coming in, speaking on it, why it's bad, and criticizing it. Then they would have introduced all these amendments to cut everything out, and then it would have come back with all these amendments, and they would have had to vote on. So what the Liberals ended up doing is saying, you know what, we're getting too much heat from this, so we might as well just get rid of it right now and start C12 at the beginning of the process all over again. So now C12 has to go through first reading, which has happened, but then it has to go into second reading and debate, and then go to committee. And this is actually really, really embarrassing for Mark Carney and his public safety minister. It just seems like fumble after fumble for them, to the point where this is what Andrew Scheer said when he was asked about it.
Are you ready to support the border bill now that the Canada Post mail aspect and the lawful aspect parts have been removed?
Well, I believe the new bill is just about to be tabled today, so we will take a look at it. We signaled our opposition to massive overreaches by the government in violating the privacy rights of Canadians, breaking long-standing principles in our justice system of governments requiring some kind of judicial oversight before they open mail and go through people's personal records and things like that. Our leader, Pierre Poilievre, demanded that this government remove those offensive parts of the bill. We'll see what they actually do. I will point out that it's pretty embarrassing for this public safety minister. I mean, Bill C-2 is actually the first piece of legislation that this government introduced. This was their signature response to pressures and requests from the U.S. government to improve the situation at our border. And they got it so wrong, so badly right off the bat, that the ministers basically had to use a mulligan and a do-over. So we'll go through this new piece of legislation very thoroughly, and we'll have more to say once we've done that. Thank you.
C2 is dead. Ding dong. And now it has been reintroduced as Bill C12. And we've gone through it. There's not even a mention of mail or Canada Post. There is no mention of cash except for penalties. There is no mention of internet data, ISP, warrantless, nothing. Absolutely nothing. So they had to backtrack so far that they didn't even touch on any of those measures. So what is the Strong Borders Act now? Well, the Strong Borders Act now is a watered down version that basically adds some efficiencies when it comes to revoking visas for potentially fraudulent international students, and it allows, more clarity on what the CBSA can do within our ports and in international points of entry. That's the crux of it. So it doesn't really do a lot to strengthen our borders. That's all it does. And this was done this way so that they could try and pass it quickly, get it out of the way, and try and claim a win that they've passed the Strong Borders Act, despite the fact that it doesn't do anything to actually strengthen our borders. But the good news, folks, is that this is just another example of a very, very effective opposition in holding a government to account that's trying to pass legislation to chip away at our charter rights and freedoms, and they're standing up and saying, not on our watch.